Before Annetta comes in to do her workshop, it's kind of intimidating to have all these cameras looking at me.
You asked for it.
Talk about intimidating. Yeah. You could hold them down a little. You don't actually have to look at them. There you go. All right, so I'm going to put before you Moir's hypothesis, unions and America are a contradiction. And my contention is that there's something fundamentally contradictory between the whole idea of labor unions and the American ethos, the American personality, the American civic life.
Take me on. That's how he peters.
And I say this to say that I contend, my hypothesis is if we don't dig down deep into this, we're just going to keep going through this like vicious circle of we do better for a while and then we fail, and we do better for a while and then we fail. So I'm going to present to you my hypothesis, and then what I'd like to do is, as I said about the papers, I want you to take 2 steps in any analysis that you do. One is problem posing, or describing the problem. And then the other one is problem solving. But I would also contend in analysis, you can't really do good problem solving unless you do good problem describing. So that's what we're doing for this half hour, is problem describing. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the analysis of problem posing. What questions do you have about what we're going to do? All right. So here is the Moir hypothesis. Unions in America are a contradiction. I have other ways to say this, but since this is being recorded, I've decided to kind of temper it a bit. Unions require, would you not say, look at this, isn't that awful? I'm going to have to use this lousy black one. Oh, I don't think that even, woohoo! That was not, all right, let's do this again. Are collective in nature. Decision-making needs to be shared. Resources need to be shared. For example, the new auto workers contract has a 2-tiered system. Well, actually, the 2-tiered system is not new, but the auto workers have just settled another contract. So there's a 2-tiered wage and benefit system. The new people come in, get lower wages and lower benefits, and that's been going on now for a couple of contracts. There was a whole discussion within the auto workers about whether the wage increase, they did get a wage increase, should go up like this, meaning you're on the bottom, you get $1, you're on the top, you get $1, or it should go up like this. You're on the bottom, you get $1.25, you're on the top, you get 50 cents. Should we be trying to equalize that? So that's the sharing of resources. I'm not out for mine. I'm the high-paid skilled worker, but it makes sense for us to share it all the way. So collective, sharing resources. Now it doesn't work at all because I left it open for just a minute. Sharing resources. An example of this might be what resources are in the public education higher ed university that you're in versus another one. Maybe at Harvard, they would have markers that work. Unions, I would say, to be successful, require an analysis, let's see, I'd say even further than that, a critique of lots of things, of the economic system, of the political system, of what's going on in society, social critique. I can add more to that. Let me go to the other side. The United States. A couple things about how the United States was founded. One is, it was a colony, obviously. Everyone knows that. It was a colony of Great Britain. The purpose was, I mean, obviously, you know, there's a sense of colonialism and imperialism has a sense of grandeur to it, you know? We're a big Great Britain and we control large parts of the world, the pride and empire. Doesn't really matter. They were trying to make money. A certain class was trying to make money. So, oh my goodness, thank you. Out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. I bet this one actually writes. Okay. So the idea was that Britain would be the producer of goods, and the United States, or the colonies in North America, would be the source of raw materials. So we would find the gold, find the minerals. None of that worked out too well.
Kind of like what we're doing to Latin America right now, or
Yeah.
what we've been doing.
Well,
to
we have
Latin
been
America.
doing. We didn't start now. Yeah. for a
Right.
long time.
Obviously.
So, and ours was an agrarian society. Now, out of that, other things happened. I'm not going to go over the American Revolution. But the ethos of the United States, as it is actually enshrined in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, is liberty and other things. Individual liberty. Each and every one of you can be anything you want to be.
That's what they
Here.
tell us.
Um,
I can't be a president.
Can't help yourself. And along with that goes an economic system based on individualism, capitalism. But it's not just capitalism. Capitalism exists all over the world. In the United States, there is the doctrine, the religion of the sanctity of private property. In fact, nothing, I would contend, is more important than private property. Private property is even more important than individual liberty. Nothing challenges private property. Private property versus human property or labor. On this side, it's the sanctity of what you can bring to the productive process, which is your labor. Not what you own, but what you is inherent in you. So this is Moir's hypothesis. We have a big, big problem in that our very values as Americans are contradictory to the idea of unions, and in fact undermine the association of workers. What are we doing? We are coming together as propertyless workers in organizations to challenge the rights of private property. We have no right to do that. Cut it out. And even if we believe strongly in unions, even if we've been in them our entire lives, I would contend that there is a piece of us that when this argument is made, at least doesn't know what to do with it. What if that right-wing commentator on Fox starts talking about eminent domain and the right to actually take your home? What if that employer, when you're in contract negotiations, starts talking about the prerogatives of people who have more skills and more education and, you know, have worked hard? All kinds of ways. What we believe in, if we believe in unions, runs up against a brick wall when we talk about our own values as Americans. Even the immigrants who come here. For one thing, these values, we export these values as much as we export anything else. So these values are now global. That's one thing. And if you're here for one generation, you're inculcated with this anyway. And we become American. American in the sense, I don't mean of as Canadians. Because Canadians, this is not, laissez-faire capitalism is not inviolable. I think I said that word out loud. Laissez-faire capitalism is not absolute. Private property is not absolute. In fact, I would contend that outside of the United States and Thatcherism in England, these values are not written in stone. We think these are the values of the world. We're raised as Americans to think these are the values. These are the best values. And in fact, these values are not written in stone outside of, I would say, the United States and, Thatcherism in England. So, I want to start with, as I said, for some people who came in later, today we're only doing problem posing. So I want your analysis of the problem I posed. I don't want your solutions. All right? I want your response to the problem I have posed. Do you think it fits? Am I missing something? Is it all a crock? Chris? Oh, Chris, got it up first. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like, where do these values come from? Because I think that it's, yes, like on the face of it, we value the, like, I don't know, the United States values like the liberty of the individual or the sanctity of private property, but like, what kind of liberty, what kind of private property, and like I think when you look at the fact that, you know, like class struggle and like the labor movement isn't alien to the U.S. I think it's also like I think that there is a wall that workers come up against, but I think it's a wall of rhetoric versus reality. And while allegedly these are our values, when it comes to actually implementing them in practice, like for example, the sanctity of private property, like, yes, if you're a business owner, the United States government's going to protect, your right as a business owner. But if you live in an economically depressed community and they want to build a ballpark in your neighborhood, they don't care. Like, they'll just, as you said about eminent domain, they'll just take it right out of you, take it right out from under you.
I think the ballpark is a very good example. Very good example.
So I think, I think that, yes, like allegedly, I think these are the values that we're taught, but I think when it comes into, like, the reality of American capitalism, it's, like, there's definitely a huge
There's a contradiction?
Yeah.
George, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, well,
Then I'm going to take Nelson, and then I need a woman to raise their hand.
well, the thing is, while it's true, I think those stated values, I think it's to keep workers in line. But this individualism is just for us. It's not. You start talking about the moneyed interest. They've been banding together forever. If you just as recently, if you look at some of the bailouts, socialism is only a dirty word for poor and the middle class. The upper class, the ballpark was a good example. How many stadiums that we subsidize? How many? All you have to look is at tax increment financing. That where we bribe companies, we give them tax breaks to operate in a certain area or low income area.
Yeah, but Nelson, your union loves ballpark building. Loves it. Why are we having casinos?
It's people who work,
Who?
construction people, then the people who work at the casino.
Right, and then, later. We'll give construction workers $26 an hour, and then later we'll give everybody else 10.
Now it's 46.
Well, I wasn't counting the benefits, I wasn't counting the benefit package. Milton, what do you want to say?
I think that it looks like liberty, capitalism, and sanctity of private property was initially an answer to, when we set up America as an answer to like the oppression from, from Britain, where people probably couldn't own their own property, I guess, but it turned out to be a good idea. But it got morphed over time into like a blueprint, I think, a blueprint for the people with the money to make the rules and call the game. You know what I mean? And I think somewhere along the line, like I said, it got morphed into something that we didn't envision. Or maybe we did.
You know, the thing is that, and this is not a class in the American Revolution, but the thing to look at, Nelson, is morphed. When something's morphed, there's a seed. You know, it's not magic. And I think if you look more deeply into the American Revolution, you'll see what the left calls a bourgeois revolution. It was actually a revolution of the mercantile class.
Yeah. Rich people fighting over who gets the cut of the.
It was the new merchant class,
Yeah.
exactly. And they were pissed off about, having to send some of their profits back to England. That's who made the American Revolution. So this stuff, it actually, there was high-minded values behind it, because as even Marx said, this was an advance in human development. Capitalism was an advance, but it was an advance even then for a few. But yeah, I like that. It was, it was a blueprint for sure. We're stuck in the, anybody see Spy Kids 3? We're stuck in it. Kathy?
I think the human versus the property, it's really the old argument that for centuries, the haves and the have-nots. And I think in the whole discussion recently in so-called mainstream media, it's the debate is whether or not it's a right. And that word entitlement and all of that kind of stuff comes into the discussion.
Anyone else?
Well, it never really was a classless society. It was always classed by property owners, like young people that could vote originally.
How many people in this room ever believed we had a classless society? Come on.
In America?
In America. Think deep. How many people in this room ever believed we had a classless society?
I'm going to grade school.
Believed. Now you know you're wrong, but ever believed that? Ever sat at your dining room table with your aunts and uncles and talked about, let's keep your hands up. That's a significant group. The rest of you were really smart.
Well, that's what you're taught when you go to grade school.
My family is working class, and my father voted against the Union. He had to have believed it was a classless society to vote against the Union. I was thinking about you, Marty, in the back. This is Marty Callahan. He's a labor studies student. And he, you're here. Oh, it's tomorrow. We should talk.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you grew up in a union family, right?
Yeah.
So if you grew up in a family that was in unions, I think it's harder to ignore that, harder to believe it was a classless society. Okay, so I lost. You know what? I can't find my phone. All right. So what do you think? And now I'm putting before you that this is a big contradiction. I'm saying that. We scramble for new organizing strategies. We scramble for great new political strategies. It's labor law reform, and then it's the Employee Free Choice Act, and then it's the organizing model, and then it's density is the all-important thing. My contention, as your professor in this class, is that without digging deep into this contradiction that unions are actually anti-American, in the sense of what American values are, we're missing something that makes it really hard for us to reach for the golden ring and real success. What do you think? Mike?
I think one is a means to the other. I've always felt that way. I mean, if growing up, you know, there were the haves and the have-nots, and the only way to get to the haves is through collectively say, hey, look, I want a piece of the pie, how do I get there? I work for a person, individual, corporation, whatever, and then allow me to get to that point. So how do I get there? I demand my rights. How do I demand my rights? Through collective bargaining. Get the group together, we get a contract, we get rights, we get better. We get better in society. We get to the American dream.
And what about the have-nots? When you got there?
Well, I'm considering myself a have-not until I get there.
And then what about the ones who didn't make it, the have-nots?
Well, we gotta bring them along with us somehow. okay?
Someday.
Okay, I have a response to that.
Go ahead.
I think that like the inherent I think that like unions could be seen as a form of co-opting people into an ineffective capitalism system in the sense that, like, I want a piece of the pie too, but like it's just not big enough. But by thinking that it's going to be big enough, I am buying into the fact that I can do it. But the values of unions versus like American values, like those aren't. It's never going to work together. It's never going to work. Like we're never going to have a successful union society and a capitalist individualist system. Like that's just never going to work.
I mean, I would say that one way that people well, I'm not going into problem posing, but I mean, there are examples in history and in the world of other ways to.
Yeah, I think that there are other ways. I think they're.
Well, let's not go into the.
Right, problem solving.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that the union structure, the hierarchy, has grown to such an extent that it's almost on a national level, those people have become the big business. And it takes away the individuality of smaller groups, smaller locals. You have to buy into their programs, their initiatives on a national level, and you lose independent thought and really maybe what's happening in your corner. And so it's really, and the people in leadership positions I think is a problem too.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't so much of it isn't exclusively we run up against this wall with our members who are inculcated with this values. Actually, we got the virus. That's what business unionism is. That's business unionism is unionism that mimics capitalism, and that is the system of American unions from at least 1955 on, you could say earlier, but at least since the merger of the AFL and the CIO and the expulsion of all the Reds from the unions. It's a business. Big jobs, suits all day. George Meany, who bragged that he'd never been on strike, right?
But a lot of that, we can't escape the culture of it. As Mike was describing, getting from the have-nots to the haves, just like the churches. That's why the Cardinal lived in a beautiful house, because the Irish immigrants wanted their hierarchy. They wanted to show that they could create something good. And so the unions wanted to show, yeah, we have some power. We want our business agent. I don't know why we call them business managers, but we want our union agents to dress well, to look good, to look against the capitalists that's sitting across the table. We want to be able to represent ourselves just like them. So there is a cultural component to that. But unions from the beginning, it is a contradiction, but unions from the beginning never sought to change capitalism. They sought to work within it. And the way they knew to work within it was to emulate what they saw, what they knew, what they had experience with. Because remember, we were all still here. It's not like today where we see what goes on halfway around the world in an instant.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another statement of the contradiction. Exactly. And tomorrow we'll go on to what do we do about it, and then a woman after George, preferably one under 60 years old.
That's, and I think that, like Mike just hit upon it. The reason we have unions was just that, we operate within this capitalist system. This is the arena that we're playing in, the ball field that we're on. And so the idea was that we band together because we're better off being together than we are as individuals up against a company. And all we wanted was to get the fairest deal we can for the worker, whether it's wages, benefits, that's what it is, right or wrong. That's where we're at as far as unions. I think it's always been that way. But how do you explain, when you talk about the contradiction, it's still, how do you explain the 30s? And also, I may argue, some of the times in the 19th century, where people banded together. That.
How do you explain it?
Yeah.
I've talked about that. Has anyone picked it up? How do you explain the 30s? And those times in the 19th century that we talked about last night?
An aberration.
An aberration. In what sense?
No, you had recessions, you had depressions.
You had depressions, okay, but
and they were,
you had depressions other times. We had one in the 70s. We laid on our back and sat in line, waiting for gas. So, yes, you're right. Recession, depression, economic dislocation does motivate people. But we've had cases where it happened and cases where it didn't happen.
Yeah, but yes,
What's different about the 30s? Let's see if people... Anybody else picked it up?
I was gonna say the Dust Bowl, but I don't think that's it alone.
No, the
That
added
added to
economic
it,
dislocation. You guys should get it. No, not you.
Adding radicals and.
That's one thing. I'm not saying that's either. Economic dislocation, a radical anti-communist, anti-capitalist analysis somewhere in the labor movement and being heard. I mean, that is what's different. Those two things are and the role of immigrants. I'm not meaning to give you my comprehensive list here because we're doing this together, but economic dislocation, Reds. By Reds, I mean not just the Reds are the hardest working, and they're the ones who'll set the tents up and figure out how to do the info tent and the food tent. And Reds have incredible organizational skills. That's not the biggest contribution that Reds and Radicals have made to workers in this country. The biggest contribution has been a critique of capitalism. It allows a left side to us mainstream pinky-wearing, Cadillac-driving union leaders. I'm glad you came. Reds, economic dislocation, immigration. Those are not Americans. Those are not people who are inculcated with these values. Those are not people who can't say, wait, Chris, who can't talk about communism or socialism without someone demonizing them. They're used to being able to talk about the breadth of political discussion. Do you remember what the first kid said in that commercial last night from Occupy Boston? I want to open up political discussion. I mean, this is another thing, is like politics equals voting once a year. Politics equals people making history.
1930s, the lefties actually got in high in the federal government.
Yes, we were invading from within. Yes, we were spies. Actually, lefties are high in the government now. And actually, we don't want to turn us into Russia. We want to actually fix America. You don't want to fix America?
No, it was not the Russian part.
You know, let me tell you, Stalinism was a big fucking mistake. Oh shit, I was not going to swear. Stalinism was a big mistake.
I mean more like Yugoslavian maybe.
Oh, give me a break. You're not going to confront this stuff. You're not going to confront this stuff. This deep-seated ethos in the American working class by setting up Albanian models.
Right.
Or wearing our keffiyehs. We should wear our keffiyehs. But that's not We got a problem. The masses don't believe us. Our own members, they don't believe us. Now, that might be different in the last month. But just because we're excited about the last month, let us take this opportunity to, we have an opportunity. We can say red. We can critique capitalism. We have an opportunity here. Rush in the door and take it. Chris. And then a woman under 60.
I think also, like, you know, all those three things that made those periods unique, but I think also, like, the ability for the rank and file to organize independent of the leadership, I think is also key, because,
Your problem solving.
sorry,
I'll put it down, but you're going too far.
but I think that's, like, I think that also...
Tomorrow we'll look at democracy movements in a couple of unions. And what happened to them. How badly they got crushed. What happened to Ron Carey? And how did the left screw that up in the Teamsters? And what's the name of the Teamster president now?
Is it Sullivan?
Hoffa.
Hoffa!
Jimmy Hoffa's.
James, a guy in a suit. A guy who's, you know, wearing the culture. Yeah, I'm pushing you to stay here today to let the problem sink in, rather than go to the solutions. Yes?
I mean, you can see how this works because working people insist on calling themselves middle class, even though that really has no definition whatsoever. But also, just in terms of the difference, I think perhaps in Europe there was a more unified working class in the sense that there wasn't so many deep-seated divisions, whereas in the United States it was national oppression, slavery, and so on, which created a kind of tiered system of working people, which fostered individualism, which permeated the movement.
And Nelson Lichtenstein, another labor historian, whose work is great. The book was a little dense for this class, so I didn't assign it as the text, but it's worth reading. Nelson Lichtenstein has this great idea, I'm trying to figure out where to put it here. Like, one question is, and one way to analyze this is, how come Europe's different? I mean, we're all white people, right? In fact, we're their grandchildren. Western culture, materialism, capitalism, values of individual liberty. He's got this really interesting, Lichtenstein has this really interesting idea, I think is really, and I think I mentioned it in class before. In Europe, a centralized and powerful state existed before a powerful capitalist class.
Yeah, feudalism.
Under feudalism, but even post-feudalism, you had strong central states. Even in Germany, Germany unifies in the 1870s, and there's a strong central government. And they're moving towards a democracy, which means more concern for the entire society rather than just the elite or the monarchy. In our country, in the U.S., the strong industrial institutions predate a strong central government. So the government is kind of the stepchild of those business institutions. Corporations, charters for corporations existed before the central government had any rights in the United States. And I think it's a key difference. It's a key institutional difference. Marty, are you a woman under 60?
What she whispered in my ear because she's so shy.
Okay, go ahead.
Is one of the issues we have to
Now you have to talk like Mary.
is the,
Come on.
one of the problems we confront is that we're the dependency between the two groups. The biggest unions in this country are dependent on the government. They're dependent on corporations to have employment. So they don't have a tendency to rock the boat.
Isn't that a contradiction? Unions are dependent, right? Because I'm a business manager. I have to get jobs or I'll be voted out.
I have to get projects from the mayor. I have to, which we saw a perfect example of it. I discussed in the other class at the Occupy Boston labor rally. All all the labor leaders got up there, and that was great. And then, you know, one person from Occupy Boston got up, who wore an Ironworkers t-shirt, who basically said, the government sucks, the mayor sucks, the cops suck, everybody sucks. And the labor leaders went,
Disappeared.
no, we gotta call the mayor, call the mayor, call the mayor, call the city councilor. Felix Arroyo was there, and they're like, that's not us, that's not us, that's not us. You know, they were all running around whispering, that's not us, you know, we gotta call the mayor, we gotta call the mayor.
So what we have is an elite to elite connection between government and unions.
It's kind of out of left field, but I don't believe this, but let's say, I think it's a problem. What do unions have to offer to capitalism? What do they have to offer to businesses?
A compliant workforce.
Right, but what, there's no like incentive for businesses, like, why would a business want a union if they don't? You know, there's no incentive other than, how do they not become the virus anymore? How do they become a player in the game that people want to have unions in there? People want to have that type of structure in the business. How does that, I think that's a problem. I mean, I think we're content with being the virus. I think we need to fix that somehow. I don't know.
Someone?
Well, yes.
Nelson, Nathan? Are you waving are you trying to bid?
Yeah, I was taking in all of this, and it goes back to your question, are unions important? When we look at all the contradictions, we talk about the big suit, you talk about the relationship that they really want to have with big business, but at the same time, they also want to try to satisfy the membership, and at the same time, it's almost the old saying, the donkey and the carrot, they keep on giving you the carrot, wanting you to keep on keeping on, but realistically, they're not really supporting you 100%.
Well, you already said it, they're never gonna accept unions under the system.
You guys can, we're not gonna put all this on, so